Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel, and today's video we are hitting the final chapter of A Clash of Kings. A very sad, depressing time for me, as this is my favorite book of the series, and also just the story for this book ends on a pretty sad and kind of almost bitter note, with a little bit of hope and positivity at the end. But for Bran VII, we also follow the pattern of Bran VI. Bran VI, we started with seeing Bran in Summer's skin, kind of awakening his powers, and now that's been strengthened even more in his time in the crypts. And so we'll start Bran VII off with Bran being in Summer's skin, describing the scenes following the last Theon chapter with the Boltons taking over and sacking Winterfell. So getting into page 719, ash falls like soft gray snow across the landscape. The wolf moves through dry needles and leaves to the edge of thinning pines. Beyond the fields, he sees great piles of stone amid swirling flames. The wind carries the strong scent of blood and burnt meat, making him salivate. And so right off the bat, we see that Bran isn't in a lot of control over Summer. It's more Summer in control while Bran is along for the ride. And that's something that Jojen's going to try to teach Bran in the next book. But we also know that in this stint of Bran going into Summer, he's been inside of Summer for 3 whole days. So he hasn't been in his actual physical form for 3 days. And that's interesting when you think about Jon getting resurrected in the Winds of Winter. How long will he stay dead? How many days can he stay in Ghost before his whole essence changes? Like, he as a person when he comes back is not the same. Like, Bran, even when he comes out of Summer's skin, wonders, like, maybe one of these times he'll come out of Summer and not know how to actually speak anymore because he's been a wolf for so long. That's a lot of the focus of A Storm of Swords is going to be on. But here it paints it very interestingly because Summer is seeing the destroyed, basically remains of Winterfell. Not destroyed, it's still a castle, but it is very much in ruins. And it's interesting because in the last book with the Game of Thrones, George had almost a very similar formula, where Bran and Rickon dream about Ned's death, and then that's confirmed once they actually get the message that he is dead. So you have the same idea here, where Bran is not physically seeing what is happening, he's seeing it through Summer's eyes. And so that is a parallel to how far Bran has come in a Game of Thrones, where now Bran actually is willing to believe the things he's seeing through Summer, whereas before, he didn't necessarily believe in magic yet, but even at some, subconscious level, he did think his father probably died. He wasn't willing to believe it. Here, he has to accept the truth. Getting back into Summer's skin, though, fire is the most dangerous smell, even more than iron from weapons and armor. Smoke and ash cloud his vision, and he sees what appears to be a great winged snake breathing flame in the sky. Now, I think this is probably foreshadowing to eventually we're going to see Daenerys come over with the greatest weapon in fire against the others. We may see something like the battle for Winterfell with Daenerys and some of the other forces. I think that will more be like if the living start to push back the others, because I think Winterfell will be taken largely before Daenerys gets involved in the Great War, we'll say. But yeah, I think that's a nice little nod to maybe what George is planning later on. Bran, as Summer watches the fire burn throughout the night, as a massive crash shakes the earth at one point. Dogs bark and horses scream in terror as human voices fill the night with howls, shouts, laughter, and screams. The wolves prowl beneath the trees while ashes and embers drift through the air, as eventually the fire begins to fade, and by morning the flames are gone. Really, what Bran is seeing through Summer is a sped up version of what is happening to Winterfell after Theon's last chapter. So Theon is knocked out. The Boltons now are basically taking people hostage. They're killing others. They're putting things to the torch. Winterfell has become more or less a ghost town at this point. It's very similar to like Harrenhal now, because there's nobody left. It's been basically deserted. And I've kind of throughout, especially this second half of A Clash of Kings, shown the parallels between Harrenhal and Winterfell, where they both kind of feel like their own characters that, depending on who's there, it feels very haunted. So when Theon is there, he feels like an outsider. He feels like the castle, the old gods are trying to push him out. It's those subtle writings that make when Winterfell is in this ruinous state, hit all the harder because it's become almost a character in this story for people like Bran and Theon. As we get into page 720, Summer leaves the woods and crosses the burned fields with his brother, Shaggy Dog, aka Rickon's direwolf, drawn by the smell of blood and death. They move silently through the remains of the men's camps, some burned, some collapsed, others still standing. No living men remain as crows cover the corpses and wild dogs retreat from the wolves. Near the cliffs, a horse lies dying with a broken leg. His brother circles the horse and kills it by tearing out its throat. When the wolf approaches the carcass, his brother snaps at him and they fight briefly over the kill. The fight ends when his brother submits, rolling on to his back. And largely this is just to show that Bran is the elder brother. He is the one in control, all that kind of stuff. But really this is just the after effects of what has happened at Winterfell, the death and carnage that's happened with the armies that were outside of Winterfell as well. Not a whole lot to really take from this outside of just what is happening through Bran's eyes in Summer. But at this point, something begins to happen. Summer or Bran starts to think of this dark place that begins to pull at him, the House of Whispers where all men are blind. He resists the pull, insisting he is a wolf meant to run free beneath the stars. But the darkness overwhelms his senses until everything fades into cold blackness. Bran doesn't want to go back to doing nothing, sitting in the crypts, but at the same time, you almost see how Bran isn't really in control here. Like, even when he's in Summer's mind, he starts to view it as a wolf. He views this like sudden blackness, not as him coming out of Summer, but more as just something unnatural happening. And then slowly he fades into Bran, realizing what's about to happen. It's interesting because it definitely shows Bran's powers have not extended to the point that he realizes that he is the one in control, not Summer. Summer is more in control as of right now. A voice calls him back. Bran, come back. He opens his human eyes and feels someone holding him while Hodor softly repeats, Hodor. Mira asks what he saw while thrashing in his sleep. Bran says he saw Winterfell burning, smelling horses, steel, and blood. He tells her everyone at Winterfell was killed. And that is the horrible moment for Bran. He doesn't know it for like a certainty, but he is very sure at this point that that is likely what has happened to his home. And so at this point, we get some very interesting revelations here as well, because Mira talks about what has happened since Bran has been away. Because Bran has been in Summer's body for 3 days. He hasn't actually eaten real food. He's gotten very little drink. Bran is basically not functioning when he's in Summer's skin. So let's say Bran was to get lost in Summer's skin for a week. He might come back and Bran, well, he might not be there at all. He might be basically on the edge of death with starvation and dehydration, all that kind of stuff. But Mira comforts him, noticing he is sweating and asks if he needs a drink. As we get into page 721, Bran asks for a drink and gulps water quickly, weak and thirsty after returning. He also feels hungry and remembers the wolf's memories of blood and burnt flesh. Jojen says Bran has been gone for 3 days while inside Summer. Bran kept him alive by giving him small amounts of water and honey, but besides that, Bran was getting weaker. Bran insists he ate while warged in Summer, recalling killing an elk and driving off a tree cat. See, this is the problem, is Bran feels like he's in control of Summer, but he's not. So he's not getting any of the sustenance that, say, Summer is, that Summer needs to survive. Bran feels like he is, and that's the problem that Jojen will try to show to him as the books go on. Jojen warns that the wolf ate not Bran's human body and urges him to remember who he is. So for instance, in the next book, when we come into the character of Bran, Jojen's going to give him tests. Remember to do this thing when you're in Summer's body, right? So that shows that you are in somewhat control. You can remember something you promised me to do, and we're going to see Bran very much struggles with that. Bran reflects on his identity as Bran the boy and Bran the broken, preferring the wolf dream. If you were somebody like Bran who can't use their legs, you constantly need help, you can't do anything by yourself, of course you'd want to go live in your direwolf. Of course. I am someone that has back issues. There are certain things I cannot do anymore. I'm very jealous of people that are able to physically work out and stuff like that, because that used to be a fairly decent part of my life that I cannot do anymore. And I'm only 26. That used to help my mentals quite a lot. And, I've had to cope other ways. But that's a whole different conversation. I do feel for Bran here, and I've come to appreciate more Bran on this reread as I've dealt with my own struggles that I can relate to Bran with. And so that's an interesting part of George's writing that I've enjoyed a little bit, especially more, I think, in book 2 than book 1. Bran talks about how in the darkness of the tombs, his third eye is fully opened, allowing him to reach summer at will. He no longer needs to try and do so or only dream about it. He can do so when he wants, which is becoming quite dangerous. It's this power that's now tempting Bran all the time to use and escape his human restrictions. He recalls possibly touching ghosts and speaking to Jon through a dream, which we know to be the case likely given that Jon seems to see Bran in his, not his last chapter, but the chapter where he uncovers the wildling army and all that stuff. But it shows how powerful Bran can be even when he's not in control. He's not able to actually control what he's doing. So it shows that if his powers are awakened fully and he's able to train more with Bloodraven, he's going to become someone much more powerful. He's going to be able to communicate to people at will, which is very interesting and important. Also, he could, on the negative side, spy on people and stuff like that. Using his arms, Bran pushes himself upright and says he must tell Osha what he saw. Osha answers from nearby, saying she has no intention of wandering further in the darkness. She jokes that she accidentally urinated on a king's statue while half asleep, as the group spends most of their time sleeping in the darkness, speaking quietly to remain hidden. That's all you can do. You're in hiding. You can't have a bunch of noise be made because maybe a guard or Theon will hear it, and then that will lead to, well, some of them it'll lead to their deaths. Others, they'll just be back to being prisoners, and you can't risk light either. So what can you do? You can't talk all that much. It's a lot of sleeping. It's a lot of that kind of stuff. It does remind me of the story of Anne Frank and some of the tribulations that they had to deal with during World War II when they were in hiding. It does remind me a little bit of that. I think it would be very tough for Bran as well because you couldn't write or anything. There's nothing to take your mind off of anything. Because for instance, Bran couldn't write a diary, for instance. But on the other hand, Bran is able to go into his direwolf. So I guess for Bran, it's not so bad. I would say it's worse for people like Jojen or Mira who are just sitting around. But even with this, trying to stay quiet, Rickon cannot be kept quiet. He's a young, kid. He's a young boy, and he's very hard to control. He's kind of wild. And Hodor constantly muttering Hodor to himself. Bran tells Osha that he saw Winterfell burning, and Osha dismisses it as a dream. As we get into page 722, it's interesting because Osha is somebody that has been north of the wall. She knows about people like Bran. She's even somebody that gives him advice saying that magic is something that does exist, and yet even she's willing to try and push back on this because I think in a lot of ways Osha doesn't want that to be the case. If Winterfell is burned and they have to flee or anything like that, Osha is going to be on the run again. She's not going to have a home, like she had at Winterfell. She was starting to get comfortable there. But Bran insists it was a wolf dream and says he smelled fire and blood clearly. Osha asks whose blood he smelled, and Bran said it was the blood of men, horses, dogs, everyone, and urges that they have to go see. Osha refuses, fearing capture by Theon Greyjoy and punishment, but Mira offers to go instead if Osha is afraid. And I think there's two things at work here. Both are a lose-lose situation for Osha. If they go up and Theon's still in power, they could easily be captured, and she would be killed specifically. If they go up and that's not the case, well, now you go to a burned Winterfell. You're going to be basically fugitives. Where do you go now? Either way, there's no happy ending to going out of the crypts. In the crypts, you can stay hidden. You can say that everything outside of this crypt doesn't matter right now, outside of survival. You're now having to face the danger that is the situation. Osha, though, responds to this by lighting a fire with flint and steel and igniting a torch. The torchlight illuminates the crypts of Winterfell as the stone statues of the Stark kings and lords appear to stir in the shifting shadows. The fugitives Bran, Rickon, Mira, Jojen, Hodor, and Osha are hiding near the empty tomb prepared for Ned Stark. Their supplies of bread, water, and dried meat are nearly exhausted, so Osha notes that either way, they were going to have to find food anyway, so might as well do it now while Bran has had these dreams that suggest there isn't anyone really in Winterfell. Everyone has been either killed or have left at this point. It's also interesting to note the way George describes them kind of leaving the crypts. We hear a lot of mysterious talk about the crypts in terms of the kings there, their shadows, and even the swords being taken that maybe are what guard their remains, make that to where they maybe don't become some sort of undead creature or maybe a wight or a shade. We don't know, but there's a lot of interesting dialogue here that George uses to describe the crypts. Osha wonders whether it is day or night outside, and Bran tells her it is day, though the sky is dark with smoke. Bran reaches out with his sight and briefly sees both the crypt and the ruined castle above. He sees Winterfell covered in smoke, its gate burned and broken. The drawbridge lies damaged with broken chains and missing planks, and bodies float in the moat while crows gather over them. Bran confirms with certainty to Osha that Winterfell has been destroyed. As we get into page 723. Osha decides to risk going up to the surface and tells the others to stay close behind. She orders Mira to prepare Bran's basket, and Rickon excitedly asks if they are going home and mentions wanting food and his wolf Shaggy Dog. Bran tells them they will go, but insists he must remain quiet. Because even now, even with Bran knowing that Winterfell has fallen, you don't want to take any risks, like maybe there's a couple people left behind just to make sure nobody pops up, especially given the fact that Ramsay, or the Reek character for Theon's plotline, which is now Ramsay, has been revealed. He knows that Bran and Rickon are still alive. Maybe he leaves a few men behind just to see if they poke out of Winterfell or try to go back to Winterfell upon hearing it's been ruined. That is something that you could feasibly see Ramsay doing. It's probably something he should have done, but he doesn't. And so it is wise counsel for them to still try and be quiet and be stealthy. Mira straps the wicker basket to Hodor's back and lifts Bran into it. Bran feels anxious despite already knowing what they will find above. It's kind of the opposite of the last book, where Bran, in his subconscious, knew that his father had probably died, but he was willing to fight against it because Luwin says magic doesn't exist, all that kind of stuff. It was just a coincidence between these dreams Bran and his brother had. Here, it's more Bran already knows, but knowing is different from seeing it with your own two eyes, seeing your home has relatively been destroyed. The people you knew are gone. It's a very big moment for Bran, and especially the story. Before leaving, he looks back at Ned Stark's statue and thinks it appears sad to see them go. Osha leads the group carrying a spear, a torch, and a sword, once forged by Mycon. Mycon had made the sword for Ned's tomb, but Osha took it after the armory fell to the Ironborn. Mira had taken Lord Rickard Stark's sword, though she finds it heavy, and Bran had taken the sword made for Brandon Stark, the person he was named after, Ned's brother, though he knows he would not be useful in a fight. It's more like just symbolic. It's nice to have that sword in your hand, to feel like you can protect yourself. And even think about this for Arya. Arya has the same thing. Like, she has a sword that's way too heavy for her, that is not actually going to be useful in her arms, but it makes her feel safer. It's the same reflection in Bran here with this chapter. But it also makes it interesting because now we see that 3 swords have been taken from the crypts. Do these have some sort of protection over the Stark remains, protecting them from ever coming back as an other or anything like that? That's something we don't know, but it's something we may figure out because it's something George does bring up in A Dance with Dragons when Barbary, Dustin, and Theon go down to the crypts and those swords are still missing. The group walks through the crypts as their footsteps echo among the tombs. They pass statues of the ancient kings in the north, each with stone crowns and long histories. Bran reflects on their stories and how he once expected to be buried among them, but now he wonders if he will ever return to the crypts again, or where he will go when he dies. That's an interesting point, because given where we know Bran's going to go, he's going to start becoming a student of Bloodraven. He's going to become, it seems like, a vessel of the old gods. Is his place to be buried in the crypts, or will he live more or less forever? We've seen Bloodraven, his life has been prolonged because of what he's become. Will the same fate happen for Bran? Something we don't necessarily know, but it could be some good foreshadowing for the future. At the stairs leading upward, Osha stops the group and goes ahead alone to scout. Her footsteps fade as she climbs the stairs into the darkness above, as Hodor nervously mutters, Hodor, as we get into page 724. Bran had long wished to leave the dark crypts, but now feels afraid to return to the surface. He's afraid to see what he already knows is there. And in reality, he couldn't have come out of the crypts before this, given Theon's occupation and the Boltons having it as well. The darkness had made him feel safe, hidden from enemies though, and the statues of the Stark Lords had given him comfort and courage while they hid below. They wait a long time for Osha to return from scouting the surface. Rickon grows restless and loudly demands to go home, and Hodor seems to back this up, repeating Hodor nervously. Osha finally returns and reports that something heavy is blocking the crypt door. So going back to when Bran talks about how the darkness had made him feel safe and hidden from enemies, I think that's just natural. When you're down in the dark and you're hiding, you can avoid a lot of your problems. And now you're coming face to face with what has happened in this book, that the Greyjoys took your castle and then basically, because of the Boltons, killed all of your people, burnt your home. You're facing a very hard truth in this chapter. Bran then suggests that Hodor can move it, and as the group climbs the narrow spiral steps in single file toward the door, Bran begins to smell the smoke as they ascend. So just confirming what Bran has already thought. The ironwood door is heavy and partially blocked, preventing Osha from opening it. And this to me would be a huge fear for me. I'm kind of surprised we don't see anybody freak out in this chapter, because if I was in their position, one of the worst ways you could go, I feel like, is like this: dying in the dark where you're blocked in, you can't get out of the crypts, you're trapped. Eventually you're going to die from starvation or dehydration, you could possibly go insane. I mean, this is a very terrifying thought, but they all place a lot of faith in Hodor, I guess. Also, a nice little moment if we think about the idea that Hodor may die in a similar route as the show with the hold the door moment. Very interesting, we had the reverse of that. Hodor is the one that saves all of their lives getting through the door in the last chapter of A Clash of Kings. Bran is removed from Hodor's basket so he will not be crushed, and Hodor attempts to push the door but initially fails to move it. Following Bran's instructions, Hodor braces with his back and legs and pushes harder. The door begins to creak and shift under his strength. And a little bit of this is foreshadowing to Bran warging Hodor in the future as well, but as of right now, it's just Bran giving slight suggestion, not mind-controlling Hodor. With a final effort, Hodor forces the door open as daylight pours down the stairwell, briefly blinding Bran. Osha emerges first with her spear, followed by Rickon, and Hodor fully opens the way, and the reeds carry Bran up the final steps to the surface. As we get into page 725, it's a very depressing sight that they see. They see that the sky is gray and filled with drifting smoke as the group emerges from the crypts. They stand beside the ruined first keep, where one wall is collapsed into the courtyard. Broken stone and shattered gargoyles lie scattered across the yard, as Bran notices the gargoyles fell in the same place where he once fell from the tower. And Bran even thinks it's honestly a miracle that he survived his fall, given that these gargoyles that seem like they're made of stronger stuff seem to be shattered. And so Bran maybe in one way is thankful for surviving as well, and maybe there was also some old god intervention, as we see in Bran 3 in the first book. We see him being awakened more or less by the three-eyed crow. Crows pick at a crushed body beneath the rubble that Bran cannot identify. The first keep is basically burned, its floors and beams destroyed, and you can see inside of it from the outside. That's how destroyed things have become. The group stands amid smoke, ruin, and death while Rickon demands to go home, and Hodor whimpers. Osha knows they've made a ton of noise, but sees no signs of survivors. Nobody's coming to arrest them, anything like that. And so it confirms everything that Bran has said. Winterfell has fallen. But at this, two direwolves appear from behind the broken tower, Shaggy Dog and Summer. Rickon happily greets Shaggy Dog, while Summer approaches Bran and licks his face. Jojen warns they should leave soon because death will attract other predators. You're going to have people coming to loot Winterfell, see if anything has remained. Like I said before, maybe Ramsay sends some men to check if Bran and Rickon ever return to Winterfell. Of course, you don't want to stay here very long. They spend the morning moving slowly around the castle. The outer granite walls still stand, though blackened by fire. They could not be taken down, because it's just not how those kind of walls would have worked, but they almost have like a Harrenhal look to them, is kind of the way I'm imagining them. Inside the walls, everything is destroyed or dead. The Great Hall is burned and its roof collapsed. The glass gardens are shattered with plants destroyed or dying. This is the biggest tragedy of Winterfell falling, is the glass gardens. Those things are expensive as hell. That's Ramsay's biggest war crime. Let's just say it right here. Right here, that is the worst thing Ramsay does in the series. It's definitely not, but I just think it's funny. The wooden stables are completely burned, leaving only ashes and dead horses. As Bran thinks of his horse Dancer and feels grief, he wants to cry. Dancer was a horse that had been trained and specifically used for Bran, and now that horse is gone. And it almost feels like any sense of Bran being able to ride a horse again is gone. A hot spring has burst beneath the library tower, creating a steaming pool from a crack in the stone. And as we get into page 726, the damage only continues. The bridge between the bell tower and the rookery has collapsed, and Maester Luwin's turret is destroyed. Fires still burn in the cellars beneath the Great Keep and in a storehouse. As Osha calls out for survivors, no one answers. It's a depressing sight. I mean, you're just going around the place that you've grown up in and everything is destroyed. Everything that you know is gone. You know, everything you played as a child, everywhere you played as a child or you ate your meals, it's all gone. Or at the very least, it's very much damaged. And everyone you know is gone or dead. There's nobody here left that you know. It's that depressing of an end for a Clash of Kings, and especially here for Bran. A lone dog feeding on a corpse flees from the direwolves as the other dogs were killed in the kennels. Ravens and crows feed on the bodies scattered around the castle, and Bran recognizes Poxy Tim among the dead despite his mutilated face. A charred corpse sits outside the ruined sept in a defensive pose, and Bran assumes Theon caused the destruction, but Osha points out dead Ironborn among the bodies as well. And also, could Theon have done this much damage with the few men that he had? But you gotta remember, Bran and co have been down under the crypts for a long time at this point. They don't know necessarily what's happening in Winterfell. They don't know how much support Theon has. Has he been getting men from, his sister and Asha, or from Balon or Victarion? So largely it's Bran trying to figure out what has happened here, and Osha is really going to be the person that puts it all together. Osha identifies Greyjoy's warhorse and the body of Black Lorne among the fallen, as Osha notices a badge bearing the flayed man of House Bolton. Bran recognizes it as the sigil of the Dreadfort, and at this, Summer seems to have a reaction. Firstly, because of the Boltons, kind of confirming what Bran and Osha are coming to, but also it seems like Summer has had this random intervention that pushes him to go see Luwin in the Godswood. So that's interesting. I definitely think there could be some more Bloodraven manipulation going on here so that Bran and Rickon can go see Luwin and point them on their way. Mira and the others follow Summer through the smoke and rubble, and the Godswood is less damaged with only a few scorched trees. Jojen remarks on the power of living wood resisting fire. Near the heart tree, they find Maester Luwin lying wounded beside the black pool. There's another thing to note here is this foreshadowing a possible conflict between the old gods and the power that Bran is going to have, and possibly the fire that Daenerys will bring with the dragons? Is there a potential conflict coming between those? I think that's another interesting point, maybe that's brought up in this chapter of foreshadowing later on. Another thing to note, Wex is actually surviving in the tree above them. And so that's another thing we'll see a little bit later on that is paid off. A trail of blood shows where Luwin crawled through the leaves. They turn him onto his back and see his robe soaked with blood. Luwin says that he knew that they were alive, but Bran responds uncertainly how. How did he know that the boys that Theon killed were not Bran and Rickon? And that'll get us into page 727. But if you're Luwin, you've known these boys your whole life. Any small little thing is going to show that they aren't actually who they're saying they are. And also for Luwin, it kind of starts to make sense when you look at his last chapter with Theon. He's not as antagonistic to Theon as you would assume. And I think a lot of that comes from, yes, Theon did a horrible crime. He still murdered 2 young boys. But at the same time, he didn't kill Bran and Rickon. He didn't, kill the people that Luwin almost views as sons. And so I think Luwin was willing to help Theon because he knows how misguided he was and all that kind of stuff. And so as we get into page 727, that's the thing. How did Bran and Rickon survive? We've had this lingering plot for the last few chapters with Theon of how did they escape? We followed them, their trail, but they seem to have just disappeared. Luwin explains he realized the boys burned by Theon were not Bran and Rickon because the legs lacked the proper muscle. They didn't resemble what Bran and Rickon would have looked like. Bran tells him that they never fled the woods, but hid in the crypts after setting the wolves to leave a false trail. Or at least, they slightly went out of Winterfell to make sure Theon followed it, but then they just had the wolves go on, and so they would follow that, and then they would double back. That's more or less what they did, and it was a very smart plan. Luwin laughs weakly at the cleverness, but coughs blood from his wounds. Obviously, Luwin is dying, and Bran doesn't know what to do. He begins to cry, realizing there's no one here to heal the maester. Usually when someone's injured, you bring them to the maester, but what do you do when your maester is injured? I kind of paraphrase that, but it's one of my favorite quotes from this chapter and of, I think, this book overall. Osha suggests making a litter to carry him, but Luwin says it is useless because he is dying. Rickon angrily refuses to accept this while Shaggy Dog growls beside him. Luwin calmly says he is old and can die how he chooses. Luwin is facing this with a lot of bravery. He knows he's going to die, but he can live in peace now that he's at least seen Bran and Rickon one more time and can help advise where they should go. It's a very somber ending for a character we've known through 2 books. Even if I've had my gripes with Luwin at times, especially in the very early chapters of A Game of Thrones, it's a sad moment. Bran and Rickon have already lost their father in the last book, and now are losing, in a lot of ways, a father figure to them. It is a big struggle for especially these young kids in Bran and Rickon. Luwin tells Osha that Robb's heirs must not stay together for safety. Osha agrees, but is unsure where to take them, as she thought about taking them to the Curwins, but now, and that's when Luwin cuts her off, saying the Curwin boy and other northern leaders are dead, and many northern strongholds have fallen. There's a civil war going on within the north. He lists the spreading war across the north and warns winter is coming amid the chaos. He believes this is foolish. Winter is coming, and we're all at each other's throats, and it's destroying our resources. We're not going to be prepared for winter. That's very intelligent of Luwin. But Luwin is very unsure of where to take them. And that's what Osha says. She's uncertain of where to take them. And Luwin maybe suggests maybe take them to White Harbor. You could possibly take them to the Umbers or the Karstarks. As of right now, it's very up in the air. But either way, you want to spread the heirs, because if Ramsay was to get a hold of their party, he would have control of both of Robb's heirs. Whereas if they're split, it's much less likely that Ramsay could get a hold of both of them. Now, you're still in a tough spot where both could easily die, but at least gives you a better chance for one of them to survive. Luwin urges Bran to be as strong as Ned, and Bran promises that he will try. Luwin tells them to leave him by the heart tree for the gods, and he asks Osha for water in one final mercy. And of course, given this is through Bran's POV, Bran does not know what Luwin is necessarily asking. And us, as being older and a little bit more intelligent than Bran because he's so young, we know what this means. Luwin is asking for Osha to end his suffering. Osha sends Meera and Jojen to take Bran and Rickon away from the Godswood as Hodor follows as they leave through the trees. Osha returns shortly afterward, but says nothing about what she did for Maester Luwin. Now we know this is the end of Maester Luwin. This is a character that's been pivotal to Bran's storyline. I would say outside of Bran himself has maybe been the most important character for Bran's storyline. And his ending signifies the ending of Bran's safety. The idea that Bran could be at Winterfell and he had Luwin who he could rely on. Now all of that is gone. His home has been destroyed. He'll have to go on the run. He has no, older mentor that he can rely on. He must now become Bran, the heir to Robb's kingdom and being a Stark. He will only have, after this, Jojen, Meera, and Hodor on their journey north. It's a big step for George, and it almost feels like the normal archetype of, like, you have Luke Skywalker, and then you have Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's obviously got to go so that Luke can become the hero or the character that he's meant to be. The same is true for Bran. If Luwin was still alive, Luwin would never allow Bran to go north of the Wall. It allows for the magical side of Bran's story to now start to flourish. That battle of magic versus, the Maester ideology, or the normal ideology, I guess I should say, of there not being magic, is over as the story starts to pivot north. As we get into page 728, Osha insists Hodor must stay with Bran to carry him, while she will take Rickon. Jojen and Meera decide to travel with Bran instead of Rickon. Obviously, Jojen has a very vested interest in Bran and knows he must help him basically get to Bloodraven. And Osha knew this right away. Osha knew what was going to happen. She knew that Hodor had to go with Bran, and so Jojen and Mira had to as well. And that left her with Rickon. Now we're going to see where those storylines end up, where somehow Rickon and Osha get to Skagos. A lot of question marks there that we still do not have answered, but that's where they're going to end. Osha plans to leave through the East Gate and follow the King's Road, and Mira says they will depart through the Hunter's Gate. Before leaving, they gather food from the kitchens, burned bread, roast fowl, honey, and apples. Outside the kitchens, they say their farewells, and Rickon cries and clings to Hodor until Osha forces him to leave with her. Shaggy Dog follows Rickon and Osha, and the last Bran sees of them is Shaggy Dog disappearing behind the broken tower. At this, Bran has lost everything. He's been divided from his brother. He's lost Osha, another person that's been very influential in his life. He's now left to his own vices with Mira, Jojen, and Hodor. That's it. He's now on the run. There's nothing left for Bran to hold him into Westeros. He now has everything he needs to go north. As that'll get us into like the final paragraph or two of A Clash of Kings. The Hunter's Gate portcullis is warped by heat, forcing them to crawl beneath it. Bran asks if they will go to Greywater Watch to find Jojen and Mira's father, which does seem like a reasonable thing to assume. Let's go to your father. He can keep us hidden, all that kind of stuff. In practicality, though, they'd probably be caught. That takes them way too close to the Bolton lands and power. Also, the Ironborn have Moat Cailin very close to Greywater Watch, so I don't think they'd even make it if they tried, but it does seem like the natural area where Bran would go, but Jojen says no. Their path will lead them north instead. At the edge of the Wolfswood, Bran looks back at Winterfell one final time. Smoke still rises, but from a distance, the castle's stone walls and towers appear mostly intact. Bran reflects that Winterfell is not dead, only broken. He compares the castle's survival to himself, realizing that he too is broken, but still alive. So there's a little bit of hope. There's a little bit of like glimmer of happiness there at the very end, that even though Winterfell has been sacked, it's burned, his home has been basically put into ruins, we can rebuild it. It's not completely destroyed. And that is how Bran feels in a lot of ways. Bran is somebody that can grow. He can gain power and strength to help bring back the Stark family to Winterfell. He is going to become a new person, especially by the end of Dance and as the story goes on. But let's be honest, as we've now finished A Clash of Kings is almost the polar opposite of Game of Thrones on so many ways. Game of Thrones, besides Ned's death, ends on a very happy note. It's a very uplifting end. It's a book that you kind of finish and you have a grin on your face because Robb has been made king. Daenerys has brought the dragons back. Tyrion's gonna be handed the king. There's so many things to look at the ending of a Game of Thrones and it's a happy read. A Clash of Kings is almost its polar opposite. George, in a lot of ways, took that and went, okay, now I'm going to deconstruct all of these characters, all of their plots, and the ending of this book is very somber and sad. Bran is on the run. He's lost basically everything. Robb's campaign is falling apart. Catelyn has done a grievous mistake, but we can understand why. She has completely lost any type of hope. She feels powerless. So that story's going on. Tyrion is on the edge of death. He's taken a massive injury, and it seems like right now he's losing all of his power, and we'll see how that explodes in the next book. Jon has just killed Qhorin Halfhand and is going to have to play the role of being a wildling sympathizer, and we'll see how that goes in the next book. Every character in this book, outside of Daenerys, and even Daenerys has that. Daenerys feels very powerless in her story. She feels like she doesn't know what she can do to go back to Westeros, how she can gain an army, all those kind of things. Her story does reflect kind of the main theme or tone of the book up until her last chapter. It's kind of why I dislike her last chapter so much compared to a lot of the other ending chapters of this book. And so, thank you guys for watching the A Clash of Kings reread. I really loved this series. I enjoyed this series so much because this is my favorite book, and to just go in depth and look at all the subtle, beautiful writing George has. And yes, I am going to make some more videos on A Clash of Kings. It's not over. We're going to have at least 3 more videos covering my rankings of the POVs, ranking all the chapters from this book, and then lastly, I'll have a conclusion where I'll talk about my general thoughts on this book. Really, that's going to be a video on why I talk about why A Clash of Kings is the best book of the series, and some of the things that are weak about it, strong about it, and all that kind of stuff. So thank you guys all for watching the reread. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I won't be starting A Storm of Swords for a little while. It'll definitely be maybe at least a 2-month break, as I kind of want to give myself a little bit of a break. I don't want to get burnt out of doing this series, and so that's a good way of just giving myself a little reward for finishing an entire book and heading into the big one, especially A Storm of Swords, as it's most people's favorite book. It's my second favorite. And yeah, so thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all have enjoyed the series, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.